On November 22, 2022, when the morning heat had not yet begun to bake the concrete of the multi-level parking lot in Dubai's Al Quoz industrial district, a security guard was making his standard rounds. His attention was drawn to a black executive sedan that had been parked in the same spot on the third level for several days. In a city where luxury cars are the norm rather than the exception, this fact alone did not arouse grave suspicion. However, there was a faint but distinct chemical smell coming from the car, mixed with a sickly note of decay, which became unbearable in the rays of the rising sun. Approaching closer, the security guard looked through the tinted window and saw a motionless silhouette covered with a light-colored cloth in the front passenger seat. Following instructions, he did not touch the car and immediately contacted the Dubai police. A patrol arrived a few minutes later and cordoned off the area. Soon, an investigative team from the Central Criminal Investigation Department arrived at the scene. Specialists in white protective suits got to work. The car door was opened with all necessary precautions. The scene that greeted the forensic experts required professional composure. The body of a young woman was lying on the seat. However, it was impossible to identify her at the scene. Her face and hands were a mass of flesh corroded by a caustic chemical. The perpetrator had acted with clear intent to destroy any identifying features, facial features that could have identified her, and fingerprints that could have identified her in a database. Traces of the same substance were found on the seat upholstery and on the floor beneath it, indicating that a significant amount of acid had been used. An initial examination revealed no signs of a struggle inside the car. The victim's clothing was expensive, from a well-known European brand, but there was not a single drop of blood on it. This indicated that death had probably occurred before the chemical was applied, either as a result of poisoning or suffocation. Toxicological and forensic examinations were needed to answer this question, but that would take time. The primary task of the investigation was to identify the victim. Without a name or face, she was just unknown number one, a case with no starting point. The police immediately began checking the car's registration number. The database showed that the sedan had been rented 2 weeks earlier from a premium rental agency in the Dubai Marina area. The renter was listed as a foreign citizen, whose details were immediately forwarded to the task force. At the same time, forensic experts carefully examined every inch of the car for microparticles, hair, fabric fibers, and any biological traces that the perpetrator might have left behind. They understood that they were dealing with someone who had attempted to commit the perfect murder by erasing the identity of their victim. The use of acid is not only a cruel method, but also a calculated one, aimed at making the investigation as tricky as possible. That evening, a brief report appeared in the official Dubai police reports about the discovery of the body of an unknown woman aged between 20 and 30. No details about the condition of the body were given, so as not to cause panic among the public and interfere with the investigation. For the detectives, the case was a challenge from the outset. In a metropolis known for its safety and total video surveillance, a crime had been committed that seemed to have been copied from the pages of a dark crime novel. They had an expensive car, a faceless body, and the understanding that the killer was a cold-blooded and methodical person who was somewhere nearby, confident of his impunity. The investigation began with the only available clue, a name on the car rental agreement. But the detectives did not yet know that this thread would lead them into a world of lavish parties, expensive gifts, and psychological violence, hidden behind a glossy facade. The investigation began with a single clue, a name on a car rental agreement. The man who rented the black sedan was Ahmed Al-Farouk, a 39-year-old real estate developer whose name was well known in Dubai's business circles. He did not belong to the ruling elite. Still, his company was involved in several successful luxury residential construction projects, which earned him a reputation as a wealthy and influential businessman. Detectives contacted him by phone and arranged a meeting. Ahmed Al-Farouk agreed to talk without delay and arrived at the police station that same day. He was calm, dressed in an expensive business suit, and appeared confident. During the initial interview, he stated that he had indeed rented the car, but not for himself, but for his girlfriend, a 24-year-old Russian citizen named Alexandra Voronina. According to him, about 5 days earlier, after a domestic quarrel, she had packed her belongings. She left in an unknown direction, leaving the car behind. He claimed that he had tried to contact her, but her phone was turned off. Ahmed suggested that she might have returned to Russia or left with another man, and expressed moderate concern about her absence. His version seemed plausible and contained no apparent contradictions. He provided detectives with her phone number, photos, and the address of the apartment where they had lived together. At this stage, the police had no grounds for arresting him. He was considered a key witness in the case, the last person who, according to his own words, had seen Alexandra alive. At the same time, another story was unfolding in another part of the city. Alexandra Voronina's friends, several Russian and Ukrainian girls who also worked in the modeling business, were seriously concerned. Alexandra, who was always active on social media and constantly in touch, had not responded to messages or calls since November 17th. At first, they assumed that she was spending time with her new influential admirer and did not want to be disturbed. However, when the silence continued into the third and then the fourth day, their concern grew. One of her closest friends, Anna Petrova, went to the apartment where Alexandra lived with Ahmed. The concierge, who knew the girl well, said he hadn't seen her for several days. No one answered the door to the apartment. On November 21st, the day before the body was found in Al-Quoz, her friends decided to go to the police and report her missing. They provided all the information they had: a copy of Alexandra's passport, her photos, a description of her habits and circle of friends, and mentioned her relationship with Ahmed Al-Farouk. At the police station, these two cases, the discovery of an unidentified body in a car rented by Ahmed and the report of the disappearance of his girlfriend, Alexandra Voronina, were almost immediately combined into a single investigation. The description of the missing girl's height, build, and hair color matched the preliminary information about the victim. Detectives immediately obtained a search warrant for the apartment where the couple lived. The condo was in perfect order, with no signs of struggle or violence. However, in Ahmed Al-Farouk's personal safe, investigators found Alexandra Voronina's passport and her diamond ring from Cartier, a gift that her friends had seen repeatedly in her photos. The discovery of the passport was a crucial piece of evidence. It directly contradicted Ahmed's version of events, which claimed that the girl could have left the country on her own. Without a passport, she would not have been able to cross the border of the United Arab Emirates. Now it was necessary to conduct an official identification of the body. Since facial recognition was impossible, forensic experts focused on two other methods: DNA analysis and dental records. DNA samples were taken from Alexandra's personal belongings found in the apartment, her combs and toothbrush. An urgent request was sent through Interpol to the law enforcement agencies of the Russian Federation, asking them to provide Alexandra Voronina's dental records from the clinic in St. Petersburg, where she had been treated. The procedure took several days, but the result was unequivocal. A comparison of the victim's dental X-rays with the records received from Russia showed a 100% match. The forensic laboratory also confirmed the DNA match. On November 25, 2022, unknown number 1 was officially given a name. The victim of the brutal murder was identified as 24-year-old Alexandra Voronina. Now the investigation could move on to a new stage. They had the victim's name, and they had a prime suspect whose testimony was already beginning to crumble under the weight of the first pieces of evidence. The investigation into the missing girl's disappearance turned into a methodical collection of evidence against a man who claimed he was only concerned about her fate. Alexandra Voronina, whose mutilated body was formally identified by forensic experts on November 25th, was born and raised in St. Petersburg, in a family far removed from the world of luxury and international glamour. Her father worked as an engineer at one of the city's enterprises, and her mother was a school teacher. Alexandra was an only child, and according to her neighbors and acquaintances, her parents tried to give her everything she needed. From a young age, she stood out for her striking appearance and tall stature, which led to her fascination with the modeling industry. She attended local modeling schools and participated in small shows and photo shoots for St. Petersburg brands. However, the girl's ambitions extended far beyond the Russian market. Like many of her peers, she saw her future on the international stage, and the United Arab Emirates and Dubai in particular seemed to her to be a kind of modern El Dorado. In this place, beauty and youth could be a ticket to financial independence and success. Alexandra moved to Dubai at the age of 22, 2 years before her death. She did not have a contract with a central international agency, but quickly found her niche in the local market. Her work consisted of shooting for clothing catalogs, real estate advertisements, and cosmetic brands aimed at a local audience. In addition, she often worked as a hostess at private events, presentations, and exhibitions, which is an everyday and well-paid activity for attractive foreign women in the UAE. This world opened up access to elite society, corporate owners, investors, and members of wealthy families. Alexandra's friends, interviewed by investigators after her death, described her as a determined but trusting person. She believed in the possibility of meeting a prince who would provide her with a stable and comfortable future, freeing her from the need to constantly look for temporary contracts and live in conditions of fierce competition. Her Instagram page was a showcase for this dream. Professional photos alternated with pictures from expensive restaurants, yachts, and famous skyscrapers. She met Ahmed Al-Farouk at a party in a hotel located near the Burj Khalifa skyscraper. He was 15 years older than her and had status, money, and confidence that made a strong impression. The romance developed rapidly, following a script that Alexandra had probably imagined in her dreams. Just a week after they met, Ahmed began showering her with gifts worth more than her annual income. Jewelry from Cartier and Tiffany, handbags from Dior, dinners at the city's most expensive restaurants, trips on a private yacht along the coast. All this was part of his courtship. Alexandra moved into his spacious apartment overlooking the bay. She temporarily left her job, immersing herself completely in the relationship and her new lifestyle. However, behind the glossy facade of this luxurious life, disturbing signs began to emerge, which she did not hide from her closest friends. In voice messages that were later handed over to the investigation by Anna Petrova, Alexandra complained about Ahmed's total control. At first, it seemed like he was just being protective. Still, it quickly turned into a systematic violation of her personal boundaries. "He checks my phone every night. He demands the passwords to all my accounts," she said in one of the messages. His jealousy had no factual basis and was pathological in nature. "He gets jealous of every like a man gives me on my photos. He makes a scene if I reply to a message from an old friend," she shared with a friend a few weeks before her disappearance. Gradually, Ahmed began to isolate her from her usual circle of friends. He spoke disparagingly about her friends, calling them gold diggers, and insisted that Alexandra spend all her time only with him or in his presence. Any attempt on her part to show independence or express her own opinion was met with coldness or outbursts of anger. This pattern of behavior, from lavish gifts to harsh psychological pressure, is a classic example of a cycle of violence in which the victim becomes increasingly dependent on their abuser. Alexandra Voronina, who came to Dubai in search of success and freedom, found herself in a golden cage, from which, as further investigation revealed, it cost her her life to escape. After Alexandra Voronina's body was officially identified, the investigation focused entirely on Ahmed Al-Farouk. His status changed from key witness to prime and sole suspect. Detectives summoned him for a second, more formal interrogation. This time, the atmosphere was different. The conversation took place not in a cozy office, but in a sterile interrogation room. It was conducted in a much harsher tone. When the investigator asked a direct question about Alexandra's passport, found in his personal safe, Ahmed's confidence cracked for the first time. He was momentarily taken aback, but quickly came up with an answer. According to his new version, Alexandra had indeed left her passport, saying she would no longer need it. He claimed that he had put the document in the safe for safekeeping, expecting her to change her mind and return. When asked why he had not mentioned this important detail during their first conversation, Ahmed replied that he had not thought it necessary in his state of stress. He continued to insist on his innocence, portraying himself as a victim of circumstances, a man who had been abandoned and was now being unjustly suspected of a terrible crime. However, his version of Alexandra's voluntary departure without a passport in a foreign country seemed extremely unconvincing. While Ahmed tried to build a new line of defense, a special Dubai police unit specializing in digital data analysis was doing its own, much more productive work. Realizing that it is virtually impossible to commit a crime in a modern metropolis without leaving a digital trail, investigators requested access to all CCTV footage from the residential complex where the couple lived, as well as along their presumed route to the Al-Quoz area. This work required time and meticulousness. It was necessary to review hundreds of hours of footage from dozens of cameras, in the lobby, elevators, on the floors, and most importantly, in the underground parking lot. The breakthrough came on the third day of analyzing the video footage. One of the detectives, reviewing footage from a camera installed in the far corner of the parking level, discovered a key fragment. The recording, dated late in the evening of November 17th, the day Alexandra stopped communicating, showed a black sedan rented by Ahmed. Soon, Ahmed Al-Farouk himself appeared in the frame. He got out of the elevator, looking around. Then he returned to the elevator and rolled out a large golf bag that looked unnaturally heavy and bulky. With visible effort, Ahmed loaded the suitcase into the trunk of the car. Although his body was not directly visible, the time, place, and his apparent nervousness, as captured by the camera, left no doubt that he was getting rid of evidence. The next step was to check his movements. A warrant for his cell phone location data was obtained immediately. The information provided by the cell phone operator was another nail in the coffin of his alibi. On the night of November 17, 18, his phone traveled from their residential complex to the Al-Quoz industrial zone. The signal was picked up by several cell towers near the very same multi-level parking lot where Alexandra's body was later found. The phone remained in that area for about 30 minutes before returning. In addition, the data showed another interesting route he took the next day, November 18th. Ahmed Al-Farouk visited one of the construction markets on the outskirts of the city. A check of his bank transactions for that day revealed a cash purchase at an industrial chemicals store. Among the items purchased were heavy-duty rubber gloves, safety goggles, and a 10-liter canister of concentrated sulfuric acid, a substance that, according to forensic experts, was used to disfigure the victim's body. The evidence gathered painted an unmistakable and irrefutable picture of what had happened. The quarrel that Ahmed had mentioned as the reason for Alexandra's departure had indeed taken place. But it did not end with her departure, but with her death. After the murder, he hid her body, presumably in the apartment. The next day, he calmly went out and bought everything he needed to cover up the crime and his victim's identity. Then, under the cover of night, he took the body and left it in a rented car in a deserted place, pouring acid on her face and hands to make it as hard as possible to identify her. Every step he took was calculated, but he underestimated the technical capabilities of the Dubai police. He left behind an invisible but undeniable digital trail that led detectives straight to him. Now the investigation had enough grounds to arrest him and bring formal charges of premeditated murder. Piecing together video footage, geolocation data, financial transactions, and preliminary findings from forensic experts, the investigation team obtained an arrest warrant for Ahmed Al-Farouk on charges of premeditated murder. The arrest was made the following morning. The task force, dressed in plain clothes, waited for Ahmed to leave his office in the city's business center. The operation went quietly and quickly, without attracting unnecessary attention. When he saw the police officers approaching him and the warrant presented to him, Ahmed didn't resist. His face showed neither fear nor remorse. Instead, it expressed cold arrogance and bewilderment, as if what was happening was an annoying mistake that would be resolved with a single phone call to his lawyer. He silently allowed himself to be handcuffed and got into the police car. His confidence in his own impunity, backed by his status and money, remained unshaken. Immediately after his arrest, Ahmed's apartment was searched again, this time much more thoroughly. Initially, the investigators sought obvious clues, but now the forensic team was working to find microscopic traces that the suspect might have left behind, confident that he had cleaned everything perfectly. In the bathroom adjacent to the main bedroom, the surfaces were treated with luminol. This chemical reagent glows in the dark when it comes into contact with traces of hemoglobin, even if the blood has been thoroughly washed away. When the lights were turned off in the room, a faint but distinct bluish glow appeared on the floor near the shower stall and on part of the wall. This was irrefutable evidence that blood had been there and that someone had made a considerable effort to remove it. Experts took scrapings from the glowing areas for subsequent DNA analysis, which confirmed with 99.9% certainty that the blood belonged to Alexandra Voronina. In addition, forensic experts dismantled the siphon under the sink and shower drain. Inside, among the hair and soap scum, they found tiny particles of human tissue and traces of sulfuric acid, indicating that the perpetrator had probably washed away the traces of his crime here. In the interrogation room, investigators began methodically laying out the evidence they had gathered in front of Ahmed Al-Farouk and his lawyer. On the monitor screen, he was shown footage from a surveillance camera in the parking lot, where he was struggling to load a heavy object into the trunk of his car. He was then shown a map of his movements, compiled from his phone's geolocation data, with precise marks at the residential complex and the parking lot in Al-Quoz. After that, printouts of his bank transactions were placed on the table, showing the purchase of acid and protective equipment the day after Alexandra's disappearance. Finally, he was shown photographs of the blue glow of luminol on the floor of his bathroom. With each new piece of evidence, Ahmed's confidence faded. His face turned gray, and his eyes became empty. He no longer tried to lie or wriggle out of it. The wall he had built with money, status, and arrogance collapsed under the weight of irrefutable facts. After several hours of silence, consulting with his lawyer, Ahmed Al-Farouk began to testify. His version was a predictable attempt to mitigate his guilt. He claimed that he had not planned the murder. According to him, on the evening of November 17th, he and Alexandra had a big fight. She said she was tired of his control and was going to leave him. In a fit of rage, he claimed, he pushed her hard. Alexandra fell and hit her head on the corner of the bedside table. When he realized she wasn't breathing, he panicked. Instead of calling an ambulance and the police, he decided to hide her death, fearing that he would be accused of murder and his reputation would be ruined. He also explained his purchase of acid and the disfigurement of the body as a result of panic and emotional distress. He said he did not want her to be identified, hoping that the case would remain unsolved. However, this confession, made under pressure from the evidence, did not convince the investigators. The cold-blooded and methodical sequence of his actions, buying chemicals the next day, transporting the body, choosing a deserted place, pointed not to panic, but to a calculated and cruel plan to cover up the crime. The case was completely formed. The police handed over the case to the prosecution to prepare for a trial. that would put an end to a story of luxury, control, and cruelty. The trial of Ahmed Al-Farouk in the Dubai Criminal Court was held under intense media scrutiny, both local and international, especially Russian. The prosecution, represented by the Dubai Public Prosecutor's Office, consistently presented the entire chain of events to the court, backing up each statement with irrefutable evidence. Prosecutors presented the court with testimony from Alexandra's friends, including her voice messages, which painted a picture of escalating psychological abuse, jealousy, and total control by the defendant, forming a clear motive for the crime. Key elements of the case were physical and digital evidence: a video recording from the parking lot where Ahmed disposed of the body, geolocation data tracking his route to the place where he hid the evidence, financial records confirming the purchase of sulfuric acid the day after the murder, and finally, the conclusions of forensic experts about traces of Alexandra's blood found in the apartment. The prosecution insisted that the defendant's actions after the victim's death, especially the cold-blooded purchase of chemicals, completely refuted his version of the state of affect or panic. These actions, according to the prosecution, showed a premeditated intention, malice, not only to hide the crime, but also to commit a callous act of abuse against the body, destroying the victim's very identity. Ahmed Al-Farouk's defense was based on the version he gave during his last interrogation. The lawyers tried to convince the court that Alexandra Voronina's death was the result of a tragic accident, and that all of their client's subsequent actions were irrational behavior of a person in a state of shock and fear. They insisted that the charge be reclassified from intentional murder to manslaughter or excessive self-defense during an altercation. However, these arguments crumbled under the weight of the evidence presented. None of Ahmed's actions, from hiding the victim's passport to methodically planning to hide the body, were consistent with the behavior of a person in a state of panic. After hearing the arguments of both sides and examining all the case materials, the court came to an unequivocal conclusion. The judges rejected the defense's version of the unintentional nature of the murder. The fact that he bought acid and other stuff the day after Alexandra died was seen as key proof of his cold-blooded plan to cover up the crime, showing he totally knew what he was doing. Ahmed Al-Farouk was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Alexandra Voronina. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment, which in the legal system of the United Arab Emirates corresponds to 25 years imprisonment. This verdict was perceived by the public as fair and logical. The case, unofficially dubbed the Dubai acid murder, became a high-profile example of how stories of domestic violence and cruelty can lurk behind the facade of expats' luxurious lifestyles. For Dubai's law enforcement system, the successful and swift resolution of this complex case was a confirmation of its high efficiency and the principle of the inevitability of punishment, regardless of the social and financial status of the criminal. The verdict brought no comfort to Alexandra Voronina's family in St. Petersburg, but at least a sense of closure. The story of a young woman who sought her dream in a glittering metropolis and found death at the hands of a man who promised her peace has come to its tragic and final conclusion.